Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Schaut, was ist für Wunder da, which translates to look, what sort of miracle is this? This is a pretty interesting chorale. Lots of unusual chord progressions abound. It's also unusual because it doesn't modulate, at least the way that I analyze it. And I was just going over my notes this morning, and I realized that there's only one chorale that I've analyzed so far, not including this one, that doesn't have a concrete modulation. Yeah, there's some tonicization throughout, but here we're very clearly in the key of C major throughout the entirety of the chorale. And granted, it is short. It is a short chorale, so I don't know, it's kind of interesting that the chorale doesn't modulate throughout, but it does have some quasi-modal vibes in the sense that the progression doesn't feel, or the progressions throughout don't feel all that normatively tonal. We're just going to hop right into the analysis. No key signature. We end on C major, we start on C major, as I said earlier. I believe we're in the key of C major. We then go to G, D, G, and B, which is a 5-chord G major with a passing 7th on the alto, nothing unusual yet. Then we get A, D, E, and A, but I reckon this D is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, and this is actually A minor in root position. So starting things off with a deceptive progression, not particularly unusual, but we're going to immediately go to some secondary dominants here, D sharp, B, F sharp, and B, which is B major over D sharp. That is 5/6 of 3, because B is the dominant of E, and E is our mediant in the key of C major. Kind of unusual to go from 6 to 3. However, we don't even end up going to 3. We go to C major, C, C, E, and G, which is our tonic triad. And this is, actually, you know what, before I continue that thought, even though I do believe these are passing tones and the tenor has a passing 7th, you could look at these inner voices on the numbered beat as accented non-chord tones, and if that were the case, we would be left with E, B, D, and G, which would be 3/7. So there is the resolution there, a little indirectly, but I definitely hear this as a secondary deceptive progression where we see B major go to C. In terms of E minor, that is 5 going to 6, and that's what I mean by secondary deceptive. Pretty cool stuff. We then have F, A, C, and A. That's a 4-chord F major, passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the tenor. Then we get D natural, F, D, and B. That's B diminished in first inversion, which is our 7 chord, 4 going to 7, very normative progression, and then we cadence on C major, C, G, E, and C, which is our tonic triad, making this a perfect authentic cadence of sorts. Kind of unusual to see a perfect authentic cadence preceded by 7 rather than 5, but at the end of the day, they function the same way. Okay, looking ahead, we have interesting cadence here. It's a plagal cadence in the key of C major. We have B flats leading up to it, which does potentially hint at the idea of F major. Maybe one could even make the argument that this is a half cadence in the key of F major. I definitely don't hear it that way, but if you were just looking at the page and looking at the chords objectively, I think you could analyze this in the key of F, but it doesn't sound that way to me, like I just said. So Bach's going to start a trend here where we begin our phrases with A minor, which is kind of unusual. A, E, and C, or 6 chord, passing 7, or sorry, not a passing 7th, passing tone in the bass, and then we get C, A, E, and C, which is just taking that A minor triad and inverting it, so we'll just change the figure bass. Passing tones in the lower voices as well, and then we get E, C, E, and G, which is our tonic triad, C major in first inversion. And if you are analyzing in the key of, oh, actually, you know what? No, that isn't true yet because we have B here. I suppose you could analyze from here, but then we would be having a secondary dominant moving forward. I think we would need B flat on the next beat to fully convince me that we had modulated, but there's definitely an argument there to say that we have. If you were to have said that we modulated to the key of F major, I don't think we do, even though we have B flats throughout. But that's just me. So tonic triad, passing tone in the bass again, and then we get G, B, D, and G, which is our 5 chord, G major. Then we have some more passing tones here. We have A, D, and F. It's like a passing 2-6-4 chord, so a little bit of transitive harmony going on. Yeah, I don't know. 2 typically wants to go to 5. 5 goes to 2 sometimes as well. It's just another way of sort of prolonging the cadence. And because Bach is eventually going to be cadencing on C through sort of like an F major lens going into it, I suppose this D minor could be viewed as 6 in the key of F major as well. But this 2 chord, I believe, just is passing, sort of bridging the gap between 5 and this interesting B flat here. We have B flat, D, G, and B flat, G, C, and E, which is C7 over B flat, which I reckon is 5-4-2 of 4, or there's some Mixolydian shenanigans going on, one or the other, because there's this interesting resolution of the 7th here. We also have some passing tones in the melody and the tenor, B flat, A, C, and F. Not really an analyzable chord, so I'll just chalk those tones up to being non-chord tones, just decorative. And immediately afterwards we get E, B flat, C, and G. So Bach doubles down and revoices the C7 chord with E in the bass. That would just be changing the figure bass to 4-3 because all the tones are intact, but we're going from 4-2 to 4-3. Very unusual because the bass is not resolving typically how we would expect. We would expect this B flat to resolve down to A. Not only does the B flat not resolve down to A, actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Interestingly enough here, the tenor is singing below the bass. That's unusual. So I guess if you take the aggregate of all of the voices here, A is the destination, or I guess you could say the A that this B flat would resolve to does get included in the texture. It's just ascending to that same B flat that the bass is singing. So I take that back. Even though the bass is going from B flat to E here, this diminished fifth, this tritone here, the tenor does resolve that B flat. So that's pretty crafty that Bach does that. So it's not resolving in the voice. It's in the voice that you would expect, at least. That's pretty cool. But the resolution does eventually happen. We get F, B flat, C, and F. This B flat being another 4-3 suspension like we saw earlier. And then we get F, which is not our tonic. Sorry, we've been talking about C7 for so long that I was like programmed to expect it to be our tonic. But no, it's still our 4 chord. And then we cadence on C, C, G, C, and E, which is our tonic triad and root position. Okay, looking ahead, we have a pretty interesting cadence ahead. We have another one of these cadences that we've seen more frequently in the videos recently than, I guess, overall in the past. You see this progression pop up from time to time, but definitely more so in the more recent chorales we've looked at. And there's an argument to be made here that it's either an imperfect authentic cadence or a plagal cadence. I hear it as an imperfect authentic cadence, namely because the leading tone is present, but if you're looking purely on the harmonic rhythm, it would be a plagal cadence. And I think both are accurate labels for what's going on here. It just depends on how you look at it. But we are still staying in the key of C major. That's true, I believe. We do go from C major to A minor again, A, C, C, and E, which is our 6th chord. And then we have some passing tones in the lower voices before we get F, A, C, and A. It's a 4 chord, F major. Passing tones in the lower voices again before we get D, F, F, and A. So we have a thirds progression here, even starting from the tonic. 1 is a third above 6, which is a third above 4, which is a third above 2. Pretty interesting progression. If you listen to this chorale, it has really unusual sort of the progressions just don't sound like they go where you would expect them to go. But before I analyze any further, I forgot to mention that we do have a passing C7 chord here, G, B flat, C, and E, and that would be a 5 4-3 chord. And you know what, I'm going to walk this analysis back here because this is not a 5-4-3 chord, this is a 5-6-5 chord. If you're already angrily writing a comment saying, no, Forrest, you analyzed that chord wrong, you would have been right, but I caught it. This is a 5-4-3 chord of 4, which is awesome because we do get a 4 chord on the other side, and it breaks up this 6 going to 4 progression. So now we just have adjacent harmony. Let's see if there's anything here bridging the gap between 4 and 2. We have E, G, C, and A. That's kind of like a 6-4-3 chord. So unfortunately not really, but in the spirit of E minor, we do have the E and the G here. So I don't really think this A minor over, or A minor 7 over E is really functioning the same way as this C7 over G is, but still we have the spirit of E minor because A minor 7 and E minor share 2 tones in common. And those are the two most important contextual tones are the ones that are in the lower voices. So this might as well be a 3 chord because that's those are the 2 tones that are being introduced to the texture here. So it's kind of like we have 4-3-2 here, or 6-5 of 4, 4-3-2. Pretty cool stuff. And then we have some more passing tones going on. We have C, F, E, and A, and I guess to be consistent, that would be a 4-4-3 chord. I don't really know exactly how much of a contribution these passing chords are making to the texture, but it seems like every offbeat since the beginning of this phrase has had 2 voices move, one of them being the bass. And when the bass moves, it does feel like there is a chord progression that's happening, even more so when there's a second voice being moved along with it. If the bass just moves by itself, not really, but when the bass along with another voice, that's, I think, the minimum to suggest that there is possibly a chord progression happening, a subdivided one that is. But after our 2 chord or our 4-3 chord, depending on how much granularity you're analyzing this chorale with, you have B natural, F, D, and G, which is G7 over B, which is 5-6-5, so 4 going to 5, that's a good sign. And then we have 3 passing tones, 2 in the upper voices, 1 in the bass. We have A, F, C, and A. It's like another passing chord. It'd be like a 4-6 chord in this case, so some transitive, not just transitive harmony, but also a deceptive progression, 5 going to 4. And the 7th of the chord does not resolve the way that we would expect. It goes up to G, then to F, then I guess it does go to E, depending on how you look at it. Maybe it does ultimately have that trajectory, but it is prolonged for quite some time, which is pretty unusual. We then have G, G, B, and D. Again, this idea actually in the same metric position, no, not in the same metric position, apologies. We have this idea of the 5 chord being re-inverted over the span of 2 beats through a passing chord as well. Here, there is the potential for, no, this is not a passing chord, but there are passing tones separating the 2 chords. In this case, however, we aren't getting the resolution to our chordal 7th, but this is just a root position G major chord. I guess that F could be included as a chord tone as well, but I'm just going to change the figure bass to reflect the fact that it's just a root position triad, so we'll get rid of the 7th. We then have A, E, C, and C. That is A minor in root position. That is a 6 chord, so another deceptive progression. Also kind of, I guess, hearkening back to this idea of maybe some like quasi or light modal interaction going on here. Lots of G going to A action, lots of lack of resolution to the tonic, flexibility between A minor and C major, the fact that G going to A is the subtonic sound where G is the 7th of A, and we're getting that resolution there. Also kind of harkens back to that idea of modality. It's more of like an older world sound. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. But afterwards, C is a chord tone, E is a chord tone, B is a passing tone. We will mark that one, but not the inner voices. And then we get A, C, F, and A, which is a 4-6 chord. And we cadence on our tonics, C, C, E, and G. And we know when we go from 4-6 to 1 with this ascending in an ascending fashion, we always get the leading tone connecting the 4/6, which is the A in the bass, the sixth or the submediate of the scale, to the tonic. It's never just 4 leaping up to 1. I think that is true of every single 4/6 to 1 progression that ascends like this, which is really cool because very seldom do you have situations that are entirely universal, that are true for every case. And in this case, this B natural, as I've talked about in some previous videos, this B natural contributes to the idea that maybe there is an imperfect authentic cadence going on because the leading tone is being resolved to, and it's being resolved to in an important voice, which the bass is. It's the narrator. It pretty much guides the harmony in terms of, you know, what's to be contextualized above it. So 4/6 going to 1, is it plagal? Is it imperfect authentic? Who knows? But looking ahead, we end in a perfect authentic cadence as we would expect, but the path to get there is very unusual. We have this suspension figure going on in the bass, which is, I don't know, anyone's guess in terms of what exactly is going on, but I'll walk through all of the chords that could be extrapolated from this texture. So we have C, E, A, and C. Again, we've started every phrase so far with A minor, except for the first phrase, but we've started every subsequent phrase with A minor, which is kind of interesting. Passing tone in the bass, then we get E, E, A, and B. I reckon this A is a 4/3 suspension over the bass, and then we get E, B, G, and B. Another 6/3 progression. We've had a 6/3-ish progression here. I think this is just another case of me confusing it because I've already analyzed the chorale, but some transitive harmony. We have seen the idea of 6 going to 3 before. And then we have E, C, F, and A. So I think there are a couple of different possibilities of what you can analyze this as. I do feel like this is some sort of suspension because I think the D is the chord tone here. If you treat the E as the chord tone, this would be a 4/4-2 chord, F major 7 over E. However, I think this D is our chord tone, and this is actually 2/7, D, C, F, and A. But the difference between these two chords is just E versus D. So anyone's guess is as good as mine. They're both functioning the same way. Personally, for me, I kind of see this as like a 3-2-1 progression, like just a adjacent harmony. But there is an argument to be made. Actually, is that what? Yeah, I do think that that is what's happened. No, I'm going to walk that back and say that isn't the case because we have this really interesting B natural here. There's lots of suspensions and interplay going on here because none of the voices over the course of this measure do the exact same thing for the entirety of the measure. I guess the inner voices link up here and the melody and the tenor link up here. We do get 3 quarter notes here. The outer voices do the same thing here, but no two voices have the exact same profile for the entirety of the measure. So this is a purely, in my opinion, contrapuntal measure. And when that's the case, it's kind of hard to pick out the exact same chords. You look for the static voices to guide you. And I think in this case, we kind of have a take on like the 3-2-3 progression where we have D, B, E, and G. This E minor triad on top just feels like the object of the progression here. It feels like the chord that's being objectively, I guess, voiced. So I'm going to call this a 3-4-2 chord, and this C is a suspension, or it's contributing to the suspensions that are happening later in the phrase. However, if you look at this D as an accented non-chord tone, which is totally valid as well, because this D under E would be doing the same thing that this E under F is doing. This would be a C major 7 chord, C, B flat, E, and G, which would be like a tonic 7 chord. And you do have to take the tonic 7 chord with a grain of salt because it is being introduced as part of a suspension. I guess it just depends on really what is guiding your ear more. I hear an E minor triad here when I listen to the chorale, and this C feels like not an afterthought, but an after effect, I guess. But yeah, I look at this as 3-2-3, but again, the difference between 2-7 and 4-2 is one note, E versus D. The difference between 3-4-2 and 1-7 is one note, and that's D versus C. So I'm looking at these sort of in a reverse fashion where the 2-7 chord feels like the D is the root to me, and in this case, I mean, like, I guess this could be a 4-4-2 chord going to a it's hard to say because the tonic 7 chords are very, very rare, and you like, this is an exact reason as to, you know, why the tonic 7 chord very well might be the case of what's going on here. And that's because it's not being, it doesn't have its own beat like you would find a chord like a cadential chord, for example, like this one. You won't ever see Bach cadence on a tonic 7 chord, really. You'll see tonic 7 chords being used as a byproduct of the fact that suspensions are occurring, but you won't really see them get their own beat. It would be very unusual if they occurred because it's supposed to be a very stable chord, and that B natural adds a major 7th to the structure of the chord, and that I think it detracts from the stability, the point of the chord. But again, really, this is a very unstable phrase, so I'll leave it at that. I think that whether you see this as E minor like I do, or if you see this as C major 7, that's entirely up to you, and there's arguments to be made for both. But afterwards we do get, let's see, C, A, E, and A. I do think this is a 6 chord in first inversion. 3 wants to go to 6. 1 can go to 6 too, that's fine as well. And then we get 4 voices moving off of the harmonic rhythm. We have B, B, D, and G. It's a good old G major triad over B, which is 5-6. And then we get another case of just the 5 not resolving. In fact, this might be a chorale where a 5 chord never resolves until the very end. We get A, C, C, and F, which is 4-6, F major over A. This B is a passing tone, this C is a chord tone, this A is a chord tone, and this E is a passing 7th. So this is just a big idea of 4. But again, the leading tone connecting the A to the C, even though we don't have a C major triad here, I suppose you can make the argument that there's like a 6 chord going on here in first inversion, but I think that's being a little too granular because the 6 chord and the 4-6 chord are just so similar. I don't really think the same level of harmonic progression is going on as, say, for example, the third phrase. But then we have, or maybe there isn't as much harmonic progression going on here, and it's just a coincidence that, you know, voices are moving in pairs and then in a trio here. But then we have G, D, C, and D. The C is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but we know that 5 is being implied. And then we have G, G, B, and D, so the resolution just consists of all chord tones as well. And then we cadence on C major, C, E, G, very low in the alto, and C, which is our tonic triad and root position, as we would expect a chorale to end. An unusual one, not so much because, you know, we're seeing chords that we typically don't see. I guess 3-4-2 is pretty rare. Other than that, I guess 5 of 3 going to 1 is a secondary deceptive progression that we don't see all that often. I think the most common one is 5 of 4 going to 2. I think that's the most common secondary deceptive progression, but we do see others. 5 of 6 going to 4 as well. Other configurations, but 5 of 3 going to 1, pretty interesting. Because what that ends up being is just 2, well, I guess it's always 2 parallel major chords, but one of those chords being the tonic. It's kind of a modern sound. But other than that, yeah, just chord progressions where chords typically don't want to go 6 going to 4, or not necessarily. I need to be careful with my language. Chords can go wherever they want, but this music has already existed. It's had its heyday, and we know that chords typically don't go to some of the places that we see them going here. 6-5-4, a lot of adjacent harmony, you know, possibly 3-2-1 or 3-4-3, just unusual progressions. The chorale has a very unique profile. But on that note, I'm just going to leave the analysis there. All in all, the chords were fairly straightforward to analyze until we got to the last phrase. But if you're interested in following me along on this journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Feel free to hit the notification icon as well. You'll be notified of when my daily upload goes live. And you could also like the video if you enjoyed the content. That would help my videos get more traffic to, or help my videos get more traffic and just get out there to more people. and I would love to have you along on the journey. There are hundreds of chorales left to analyze, and I'm very excited to analyze them. But on that note, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.